everybody. Happy Thursday afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Erica Rand Silverman, and I'm a literary agent at Stamola Literary Studio, and we create these Stamola Live events to bring conversations between publishing people, authors, editors, art directors, directly to you and to children. So today we have a really perfectly timed conversation for the season all about ghosts with Jodi Lynn Anderson, who is a best-selling and highly acclaimed author. And I don't have her books because I'm at home and not in my office, so I made this sheet to just show you all the amazing work, and I might have probably missed some titles, I'm not 100% sure, but this gives you a great overview, and I'm sure you recognize some of them too. And Jodi will be here and speaking with her longtime editor and friend, Liesa Abrams, who's currently the vice president and editor-in-chief of Labyrinth Road, which is a new imprint. So hopefully Liesa will tell us a little bit about it at Random House, Penguin Random House. So without further ado, I'm going to bring them in, and I just, as always, like to remind you that you can subscribe to our channel. My 11-year-old tells me I don't do that with enough zest. He says I should say subscribe. So that's what I'm going to do. And you can like the video at the end if you indeed liked it. And all of that helps us to reach more people with these really inspiring, really informative, really fun, free conversations. So I'm going to first bring in Jodi. Hi, Jodi.
Hi, subscribe.
So, I was like, you should pop onto the screen. Wouldn't that be amazing if he was like, so he's at school today, but maybe next time.
Yeah, next time.
And I'm going to bring in Liesa too. Hi, Liesa.
Hi.
So thank you both so much for giving your time. I know you want to hang out and talk to each other anyway, but I'm so grateful that we get to listen in and hear all about how it is that Jodi, who writes, you know, like Rosemary, her agent says, mostly books with narratives grounded in reality, and yet they're full of the supernatural and ghosts. So can't wait to hear more about why that is. And I will be on the back end, so I'll be in the chat talking to you all, and we'll take questions at the end. All right, everybody, enjoy.
Yeah, hey.
So I was curious because it's funny, Jodi, we talk so much about ghosts in books because that's how we've always, the ghost conversations we've had since the very beginning have been the books we've worked on together where the ghosts pop up. But, you know, we've talked less about your early experiences and interest in ghosts even before you were writing books. So I feel like it'd be nice to start with what are your earliest memories of ghosts that kind of hooked into you and compelled you that you think are part of what drove your longer interest in ghosts?
Yeah, sure. By the way, I don't know if you noticed I'm wearing my bat dress in your honor. Yeah, so I grew up in Ringwood, New Jersey, and there is a park there, which being from New Jersey, Lise, you probably know. It's called Ringwood Manor. And so my first memory of ghosts and ghost stories comes from visiting that manor house. There was a tradition of singing carols outside of the manor house at Christmas time. And it was a huge old, it's the house of some tycoon from the late 1800s or something. And so there were all these windows, and the first two levels of the house were completely dark, completely lit up, and the whole lawn was illuminated with the lights from these windows. But then the third floor was completely dark, and it was common knowledge that they kept that floor reserved for the ghosts. And that was kind of the first really visceral experience I had with the idea of ghosts that I can remember. And also my sister had a good friend who I knew who worked there. She cleaned the halls and the rooms after it would be shut down at night. and she said that she saw ghosts there. So I always had, and I think a lot of the kids that I knew had this sense of spookiness and a little bit of fear surrounding that park in our town. Um, and a big thing that was really popular when I was a kid were the book series Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. I don't know. Did you ever read those? You read those?
I didn't, because as we know, I was not a ghost person. Well, we'll get there.
Yeah. So my bestie and I, whenever we had sleepovers, we'd read those stories to each other. And so I think it was just a big part of like a thrill of childhood for me. And then when I was a teenager, my mom, we had just moved back from living overseas. I was probably 16, and my mom was working in a library in Annapolis, Maryland. And this is not, I'm setting it up as if it's going to be this amazing ghost story, and it's not. It's actually about, I'm just talking about a book I found, but I found this book. I would go there and wait for her to finish work, and I found this book, which I've tried to find kind of the title of since, and I haven't been able to track it down. But it was really a nonfiction, big, thick book about the sort of underlying influences of how cultures create ghosts and how we build ghosts and why we build ghosts. And it made just this big impression on me. And I set it aside, and I didn't think about it for many years. And yet I think it was always there, sort of composting that, how fascinated I had been by that, and how meaningful it was to me in a lot of ways. And I think that didn't really, I didn't even think about that book until I started to notice that all my books have ghosts in them, which was not intentional. And then I started to realize, like, okay, this has sort of, that was a piece that sort of fed into this. And it's kind of led me here.
Did you believe in ghosts, like when you were younger, and like you talked about the third floor was reserved for ghosts, and your sister knew someone who, worked there and saw the ghosts? Like, did that all feel real to you at the time?
I think that I think that I would probably say it's the same. It was the same for me as a kid as it is now, which is that I absolutely don't believe in ghosts, and also I totally do. Like, I definitely think both of those things are true for me, and possibly maybe a better way to say that is like it would take a very little feather to push me over into really believing in ghosts. I definitely want to believe, because I think that if ghosts are real, magic is real, and I already believe magic is real, but I believe in my heart, I think, and not my head so much.
So,
what do you believe in ghosts?
I don't. and I think of all the things I've wanted to believe in, ghosts are not on the list. Like what you were just saying about like, I know exactly what you mean about you believe and you don't believe at the same time. I'm such an overall sort of agnostic person while being really spiritual in these bizarre ways, and always thinking like the universe, capital U, is doing things, even though I also am skeptical of everything. But I think ghosts to me, there's something that's so horrible in the idea of someone who has to exist intangibly. I think like where so much fantasy works metaphorically to sort of be wish fulfillment in some way of like, if this, or to kind of like play out this metaphorical need or desire that humans have. But to me, and obviously it also works for fears, and so that's where ghosts operate, I guess. But that the sense of isolation to me, of being able of being invisible to people you love, of not being able to touch anybody, like, and interact directly with the world on a sensory level, like, that is so sad to me, I guess. Like, it's I've never been so caught up in being afraid of things that don't seem real, but I definitely could be made sad by them, I guess, if that makes sense. So
yeah, it's funny. I was telling my son today that I was going to be having this talk with you, and he was like, "Well, what are you going to be talking about?" And I was like, "Ghosts." And what about ghosts? And I said, "Well, probably a little bit about why I write about ghosts." And he said, "Well, you write about ghosts because it helps you to laugh at them and make them less scary." And I think that is one of the many pieces, because they are so attached to a sense of loss and a sense of disconnection. And I think that it's helpful for me to make other spaces for them in a way, because I think a lot of my ghosts do relate and do kind of have agency, and do kind of spread out and have kind of a movement in the world, in a way that's different but still meaningful. And so in that sense, I would say, so Maybird and the Ever After, which I do have it on this.
And that was your first ghost.
This was my first book about ghosts, and this one I actually meant to write about ghosts. And when I started writing that, it was when my mom was really quite sick, and it was probably 20 years ago at this point when I started writing this trilogy, and it just, I was surrounded by so many fears, and it was a way to find hope in those fears and to laugh and be goofy with a lot of the ghosts, which isn't always the case in the ghosts I write. They're not always goofy, but a lot of times they are. And it's really important to me to focus on the luminosity around them in a lot of ways, and the beauty around them in a lot of ways.
So how do you think your ghosts have evolved since Maybird through to some of your more recent books? What do you think? You keep coming back to ghosts, but as you said, you come back to them in different ways. What are some of the different paths or approaches you feel like you've taken with ghosts?
Yeah, I think it's funny, how many angles I find make ghosts my favorite thing. They're because of this or because of that. There's just so many ways to look at them that I think speak to me. And so one is, I think, learning about my voice as a writer, which has taken a lot of time to sort of just discover what is it that's in me that I feel like I have to offer that's somewhat unique. And I think over the years, I've sort of come to believe that what I have to offer is a sense of true magic, and the magic that's grounded in kind of reality. And so, I kind of think about it as going back to impressions that I had when I was a kid. And I think there are certain truths I think we know as kids that we sort of learn to get away from and learn that they're not practical or realistic or logical. And I think a lot of my journey as a writer is kind of coming back to some of those truths. And so what those truths are involve this sense. I used to walk in the woods almost every day when I was a kid. We lived right against this forest. And I spent so much time back there by myself, just with my cat, just walking around and imagining things. And I just had such a strong sense of life in the trees and nature and the things that I couldn't see. I just felt like there was so much unseen magic surrounding me, and I didn't feel alone. I felt um, embraced or like carried, in a lot of ways.
Do you think ghosts, that's just interesting. Do you think that ghosts, the idea of ghosts is comforting in the sense that people who do feel alone or lonely would have this idea that there are always, even when you can't see anyone near you, there are people near you? That's also, that could be creepy too, obviously, but maybe it's comforting.
I mean, I think that I think having someone get it, like get what we go through, someone who's like a witness a little bit is like an appealing.
Your ghosts do tend to be witnesses. I'm thinking about in a lot of your stories.
Yeah.
The ghost characters are often characters who have quietly watched these kids grow up. And
Right.
yes, so it's about maybe feeling seen, which is my big, as everyone who works with me knows, my go phrase is like how we all want to feel seen. So that's interesting to think of.
Yeah.
Maybe that's an angle to ghosts also.
Yeah, and I think actually, like, I would even say too that it's really about what, like, seeing, like, a lot of my characters as well, like my main characters are often observers, and I think that I really am drawn to the idea of being somewhat invisible and getting to watch kind of the world unfold and watch people unfold and do the things they do. And so, that's kind of another aspect that sort of makes writing about ghosts appealing to me. But yeah, I think like ghosts for me are very entwined with the sense of like ghosts and trees. Like I'm always writing about ghosts and trees. And I think it's because they're very similar to me in the sense of like there is more than meets the eye looking at a tree. And I feel like ghosts are my symbol of like there's more to reality than what we see.
So what about, do you want to talk about some of the books where ghosts have slipped in where you didn't intend to? Like your upcoming book, that's the case, right?
Yes. So I'm trying to think. Yeah, I think most of my books actually I was trying not to write about. So you and I did My Diary from the Edge of the World together, and that was not supposed to have ghosts, but they kind of showed up. And they're more of like a piece of texture, I think, in that story, and a piece of like a little bit of lightness and silliness, which they often are, and a little bit of magic still. The book that is coming out that just came out, Each Night is Illuminated, does have ghosts, was not supposed to have ghosts. And then I thought, oh, I really need to put some ghosts in here. And then I thought, I'm not doing that. Yeah. So in Each Night Was Illuminated, it's about basically a girl and a boy when they're kids witness an accident, a train accident from a distant point. They're on a kind of a mountainside and they see this train crash into the river. The bridge collapses, and they part the next day. He's going back to Australia where he lives. She lives in this small town. And it's only years later when they're teenagers and they reconnect when he comes back to town that they realize that they saw different things that day. So he saw ghosts rising from the river where the train crashed and the people died. And then she just saw this empty void and just was devastated and sort of lost her belief in any kind of magic if something so terrible could happen. And so he, as teenagers, she has insomnia, and he tries to convince her to go ghost hunting with him. And even though she doesn't believe in ghosts, she's up all night anyway because she can't sleep. So she decides to go with him. And the ghosts are really about her sense of like possibility and whether she can believe in the things that aren't so tangible. And it's really a parallel for her sense of faith and particularly about her sense of faith in hoping to kind of work against climate change and what can kind of one person do, and who knows if we can do anything anyway. And her kind of this boy's kind of introducing her to this idea that maybe there are things that are worth reaching for, even if you can't see them, such as ghosts. Kind of parallel this idea of you can like you have to sort of reach toward the change that you want to create, even if you don't know if that change will ever come about. And that's kind of how she comes to this sense of, in her, as she's learning to define her own faith, that becomes her definition of her faith. So it's funny because it's like not about ghosts at all, but yet ghosts are such a huge part of the story at the same time.
I'm curious, like just backing out, people might be interested to hear in terms of like, you've talked sort of more about your interest in ghosts and some of the themes that ghosts represent, but I wonder if you would tie the conversation that you and I had a while back as far as exploring all the different the different reasons people write, the different reasons people publish books. Like where that intersection happens for you, do you think, of why you're driven to write story, the books that you write, and how that intersects with how ghosts would maybe organically always end up in your stories?
Yeah, I really want to hear that from you too, because I think it's so interesting. One of the things that has been a surprise to me as a writer, sort of working my way along, is just finding out, like 10 years in, like not everybody's writing for the same reason, which it took me a long time to clue into that. And it's really fascinating to hear what's deeply motivating to people to make them write. And I know you and I, when we had talked about this months ago, you had talked about reaching people who can see themselves in stories and feel like understood. And I mean, can you say a little more about that? And
Sure. Yeah. So that's the sort of definition of, as Erica mentioned, that I'm working on this new imprint, Labyrinth Road, and the name, the sort of origin story of the name for Labyrinth was because this idea of the books I've always gravitated toward editing and publishing are stories where a reader can get safely lost. They can escape what's around them, but also the sort of that whole idea of a labyrinth is something where you travel like a journey to your center and then find your way back out again, and know that you can do it safely, and that there is a way back out. And so it sort of links together. Like it's funny when we talk about how you work on these really grounded stories that have fantastical elements, and I tend to edit either like full-on fantasy novels or contemporary realistic stories that don't have anything fantastical. And the link for me, when these often on the surface seem different from one another, is always that sense of like, these are books about intense journeys of characters who are dealing with some sort of urgent stakes that are both emotional and epic. And so just as you said, yeah, it's like, I was so that kid who felt unseen and alone. There were no ghosts. There were no ghosts keeping me company. It was just me at home. And it was books. It was books where I felt like that experience of, oh my gosh, there's people in the world who do think about these, the way I do, and who made it to the other side of trauma. Like it was like, this is why we, when everyone who knows me as Batgirl editor knows that I'm obsessed with Batman, because Batman was this looming character for me of someone who went through huge trauma and came out the other side. And I needed to believe that with the childhood I had, that was possible for someone to do. So yeah, so for me, like, and obviously, of course, I also love a good story, but it's always like the books where I read the books with the eye toward who is the kid who's going to read this and feel less alone. And I think I was just thinking about you today, actually. I was thinking, how I loved that line in My Diary from the Edge of the World about the sadness that the character has about when she no longer is like so excited to jump in a pile of leaves. Like that's when you stop, like when you're no longer a kid if it's not as fun. And I was kicking my way through leaves and I was like, I'm 45 and I still enjoy like going through a pile of leaves. So by Jodi's definition, I can still be a kid. But it was just, it was a sentence like moments like that you do so well in your books that are so authentic and true to emotions and grief and longing and loss and all of that. So I think where I tie into your ghosts was how they tie into the theme of loss.
Yeah. I think one of the best, truly like the best and most unexpected moments in my job is like when someone catches like something, some sentence or a character and they feel like I've said something that they felt and didn't know to articulate, or like that somehow we've connected across the page, because as I'm sure you have, and everybody probably tuning in has, like, it's like when you read something that you felt so strongly and not been able to articulate even to yourself, and then you see it in a book, it is like the greatest release and relief and joy. And like, I'm sure we've all cried over those moments in books before, because when someone is able to capture something that's somewhat like ephemeral, about or hard to express about who we are, I think that's such a gift, and it's such a gift, like for both, like the writer and the reader, to be able to connect in that way. I think that so much. It's funny because there's this Annie Dillard, I think it's Annie Dillard quote, a book is a net of days, a story is a net of days. Like I think she talked about how her motivation is capturing moments before they slip away. And I think when I started writing, that was definitely a major motivator for me, is to somehow try to capture like the truth of a moment, or the beauty of a moment, or the sadness of a moment, so that it just couldn't get away from me and disappear. And I think that it's funny, because I think ghosts are kind of a net of days in that same way to me, is that I think ghosts in my heart are a way of like capturing what's lost and capturing time that's gone, and somehow like holding it still. And so I think that's still a big motivation for me as a writer. And I think also just as a writer starting out, I was hoping that eventually, if I worked really, really hard over like tons of years, I would just be able to sometimes write something that shifted like a paradigm, just a little, like shifted someone's view of what the world could contain, just the tiniest, fraction of an inch. And I think that is really what I'm trying to do when I write about magic, is try to share this sense of possibility that I feel so intuitively, and I think a lot of people feel so intuitively, but it's not always validated by the world, and obviously by circumstances in the world. But I just do have this very stubborn, persistent, like sense of hope and optimism. And I think that's really what I'm trying to capture in magical stories. And that sense of like the luminous glow around even the really hard things. So yeah.
Do you have other favorite ghost books or movies or TV shows that are like Jodi style ghosts?
Yes, I do. So let's see. So some really great ones. White is for Witching, Helen Oyeyemi. It's kind of about a house that kind of tries to like suck in the women that live in it, but it's also kind of somehow about displacement and xenophobia. I don't know how she connected it all, but it's such a cool book. And then let's see, some really classic ones like The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. I love Shirley Jackson. And her other creepy book, We Have Always Lived in the Castle, which is amazing, but not a ghost story. Beloved is an amazing, as most people have probably read it, but it's the way that she employs a ghost to tell a story that's so tragic, it's almost unspeakable. And she gets at it through the ghost, which is just mind-blowing. And The Woman in Black, which is an older story, I think from like the 40s, and very just classic, spooky, beautiful. Yeah. I don't know do you like any ghost stories, even though you don't like ghosts? Or any ghost
I like your ghost story. I had so Eloise, of course you remember Eloise, but for anyone, Eloise was once actually both Jodi's and my boss at the first job where we met. I think we forgot to say how we met because
we did forget to say that.
We were both editors at the same company a bazillion years ago. But Eloise once said something.
We did not like each other.
Yes, that was the other funny. Right, we didn't we didn't like each other at all until I edited Jodi's books Glory, actually, the first series before Maybird. And as I always tell, like I when I first met you, and it was like, oh, this person is so insincere because she's so sweet all the time. And then I was editing your book and it was like, oh my God, this is really who she is. She's actually an incredibly good human being. And then I fell in love with you through your writing. But so one time when Eloise was saying something about there was a historical novel she wanted me to read, and I said, historical is not my thing. And she said, that's why I want you to read it, because if someone loves it when it's not their thing, then you really know you have something special. And that stayed with me all this time. Not that it means that an editor should edit books out of their comfort zone or out of their, because as an editor, you need to have a vision for it and you need to really understand it. But that when you love and connect with something that isn't normally your type of thing, that speaks to a universality to the appeal of what the author is doing, that it extends beyond. So typically when agents send me things and it's sort of like, it's a creepy ghost story, it's like, that doesn't usually connect for me. It's not usually the thing that excites me, but I think I do like I like a story that involves ghosts, if just exactly what you said, if it's really a story about loss or connection or seeing and being seen, all of those themes. I think I've always been less interested in kind of like Scooby-Doo style ghosts, I suppose, like sort of silly, funny, like, ooh, scary ghosts, you know?
Yeah. Wow. I think all the ghosts are good ghosts. I don't know.
People also used to call me Casper when I was a kid because I was super pale and they made fun of me. So maybe the roots to my ghost feelings are that's how people used to tease me. So
that's better than Grody Jodi. That's what I used to get.
Was that a Garbage Pail Kid name? Is that where that came from?
Oh, that may have been connected to Garbage Pail Kids. I never even thought about that. It probably was it was of that era for sure.
Yeah.
Well, also, all right, we can just address each other as that from now on.
Yeah.
Take ownership.
Do you think you will ever write a book that doesn't have you written a book that has zero ghosts? I'm trying to think.
Um, I have, but then there's always like a fairy or like a mystical. There's always something, there's always something magical. And I've been working on this adult mystery novel for years and hoping to finish it this year. And it also, for about 10 of the years I was working on it, had no ghosts. And now a ghost is very much a piece of the story, and like very, to me, like satisfyingly so, because it is really about, it's quite that thread of how the ghost is kind of a net of the days of the story, and also how the ghost is the sense of magic in the world is quite like sewn in at this point. And so yeah, so I don't know if it'll ever happen without ghosts. We'll see. But
It's interesting, like you keep saying, you keep sort of connecting ghosts and magic for, I understand that sort of that desire you have for your books to instill hope and the sense of possibility and like expanding boundaries and limits for readers. And for you, ghosts seem to really represent that, like to sort of connect to magic.
yeah, that's so well said. Yeah. And I don't know, it's just fun to be part of this with you as well, because we know each other so well, and we know you're the kind of editor who just helps. So Liesa and I worked on the first book in 13 Witches together. That we did the 13 Witches trilogy. Liesa then left to found her imprint, and now I work with Kristen Gilson on that trilogy. I was like weeping to Liesa when on the phone after I turned in my first draft, because I was like, this is not going to happen. I don't know how to tell this story. And you're just the kind of editor who just lifts your writers up so that they can sort of reach for the thing that they want to reach, And I think it's like, even though, as we talked about, we all come at why we want to bring books into the world for different reasons. I think that there's just this cohesive sense of just the love and the passion that that just helps writers like me sort of find their way through the dark, toward those things that are most important to us as writers. And I just love you for that.
I love you, man. I think that's like there's a core question, which sounds probably weirdly obvious, but that I always do try to work with writers on, is like, I want to understand, what is your purpose with this story? Like I want to make sure I understand it well, obviously, to be the right editor. But sometimes I think authors even need to kind of go back to that point. Like I remember we did that with 13 Witches. It was sort of like, what do you want this story to do? And you had it so clear in your head that you wanted it to be a story about how stories can save. And it's interesting when you just were saying that I sort of helped light this way through dark path. And in the story, it's very much about, it's like, it was like the character, like literally, finding a magical weapon that helps bring light through her belief, again, her belief in magic, and believe in the magic of stories that we tell. So sometimes it's helpful, I think, for writers, again, as oversimplified as it might sound, like when the problems start to feel so complicated and so big, and they often really are, but just to get back to that place of like, what do I want this book to do? Why am I writing this book?
Right. Yeah. And you're so good at keeping that as the priority, which is a beautiful thing.
Do we have any other questions?
Yeah, any other questions?
We don't seem to have questions yet, although this is your last chance, everybody, but we do have some lovely comments. I really like this one, which I thought you might appreciate, Jodi. I know it's hard to talk and look at the chat at the same time.
Yeah.
So you talk about luminous glow as a sense of magic and something good. In 13 Witches, familiars have that luminous glow. Magic as good and bad. good with the bad.
That's true. That's true. I think there's, that's such a good point. And I think it's, especially in those books, I think that luminosity is it really does literally represent what goes unseen. And that goes both ways. And there, I think um, I don't know. I had a friend say once, like, there's just some things that happen. You just wonder if, like, there's just there's got to be something just trying to break us down, and I think that the luminosity in that book does embody both the things that are sort of bright and magical, and also those kind of underlying kind of influences or forces that kind of mess with us. And yeah, that's a good point. Thank you.
And Ro has been chatting along with you ladies in the chat. If I had the ability to put her up on the screen, I wish I could. But this is one of the comments that I particularly love. And Rosemary writes, and yet Jodi's ghosts are connected and relate to one or more of the humans in her. Oh, no, that's not the right one. Oh, that one's good too, Ro. This is the one I wanted. Yes, but Jodi's ghosts also allow her characters to see things within themselves.
Yeah, that's so lovely. Yeah, they're so, I think the ghosts are always what surrounds the center of the story, and the center of the story is always a human, and a human trying to figure out how to navigate the things that are outside of them, but also, my characters are quite flawed, and often flawed in the same. Many of them are often flawed in the same way that I'm flawed, and trying to sort of navigate as I'm trying to learn to navigate, challenges and things that are sort of roadblocks for myself. And part of how I explore that in the world is through stories, because I don't ever have answers. I only have questions. And I think that my stories are often filled with those questions. And yeah, I think the ghosts just sort of wrap that up and carry it. And it's the humans that are kind of at the heart of that story.
Well, I want to say a really big thank you to both of you, Liesa and Jodi. Thank you so much for letting us listen in as you catch up and you talk. And there is so much. I mean, I love these conversations because there's so much to learn. And what I particularly love about your conversation today was that it wasn't. Oh, there is a question, which I'm going to get back to. But it's not always just about writing that we learn about. And particularly today, I feel like I learned a lot about the insight from an editorial point of view, which as an agent, some agents are more editorial than others, but I am always learning, having come from education as a teacher and not having come from publishing as an editor. So I just feel like hearing your conversation, hearing about what makes Liesa such a wonderful editor from your point of view is just really interesting for me. And I know that lots of publishing people come to these conversations as well. So I was so glad to hear that side of the conversation. Rosemary is asking, do you ever think about the age of your ghosts? Like how old they were when they died, or like how long they've been living as or not living as ghosts? I'm not sure what she means.
Yeah. I mean, I think that most of them, yeah, I think they're mostly stuck in a moment of some sort. I think that's a pretty consistent thread through all of my ghosts that are actually real and do show up on the page rather than sort of lurk around the sides of the pages. Is that they are sort of stuck in a place where they were when they died. So.
Okay, well, so I'm just going to close us out tonight by telling everybody that if you received our newsletter, you saw that we always highlight one indie bookstore. And so the indie bookstore that was highlighted for this event is The Curious Reader, and they're up in New Jersey in Glen Rock. They just had an amazing literary festival out there, which brought so many authors and illustrators and so many community members to buy books, and we're so grateful to them for all their efforts, and we have to support our indies. So I put their link in the chat. I don't know if you can actually highlight that, but it's The Curious Reader, and their online ordering system is really easy peasy, and they have all of Jodi's books. And so if you're inspired and wish to go purchase a book, that could be a great place to do it. And I will say to Jodi and Liesa, please stay on for a moment when I let everybody else go. And for everybody else, we have more events coming before the end of the year, and we'll keep you posted at through our newsletter. And so if you have not subscribed to our newsletter, that is another subscription you can do. And you can go to stimolalive.com, subscribe, and we only ever email about events. That's it. So, and the events are always about authors. If you haven't yet subscribed to the YouTube channel, you can be updated about upcoming events that way too. Subscribe. And if you liked the conversation, you can like it with a thumbs up. And we really look forward to seeing you all next time. Thank you so much for joining us. And there's comments, Jodi and Liesa, thanking you and telling you guys how much they enjoyed the conversation. So everybody enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.